Okay, so here's one you might not have bumped into before. A conspiracy theory called Ebola worship.
Yeah, it sounds pretty out there.
It really does. And let's just be clear right from the start, this isn't like, some big organized thing with secret meetings or anything like
No,
that.
not at all. But what makes it interesting in a disturbing way is how it shows misinformation can spread, especially when there's a lot of fear around, like during a health crisis.
Exactly. So for this deep dive, we've basically trawled through, well, a lot of different stuff to figure out where this idea even came from. What are the actual claims and what kind of damage does it do?
Hmm.
Our aim isn't to make it sound like Ebola worship is some established theory. It's more about picking apart how fragmented it is
Yeah.
and tracing it back to, well, probably online stuff, and also that local suspicion during outbreaks.
And it's important, I think, to say up front that this is pretty unsettling material we're discussing. We're trying to understand how these ideas pop up and spread, definitely not to sensationalize them.
Right. Okay, so let's get into it. First thing to really get is that Ebola worship, it's not some like coherent belief system. There's no single rule book.
Exactly. It's much messier than that. Our sources point to it bubbling up from basically two main places, maybe interconnected but distinct starting points.
And the first one is that often pretty dark corner of the internet, online trolling, deliberate disinformation, and specifically something called the Ebola-chan meme.
Yeah, Ebola, yeah. What's really awful about this one is the intent behind it was just clearly malicious.
So what was it exactly? Is this Ebola-chan?
It was basically an anime-style drawing, a character meant to be the Ebola virus.
Right, like personifying the virus.
Mhm.
Often drawn looking Caucasian, I think, with this weird pink hair shaped like the virus itself.
That's the one. Sometimes in a nurse outfit, but then maybe with like a bloody skull or demonic wings. Really unsettling, as you said.
And where did it start?
It looks like it first appeared on Pixiv. That's a Japanese site for artists,
Yeah.
but it really took off or got weaponized on 4chan, specifically the poll board.
Poll. Right, known for being, let's say, a hotspot for controversial, often extremist stuff.
Exactly. And from there, users deliberately pushed this meme onto Nigerian online forums. Narrowland was one mentioned.
And why? What was the goal?
According to the sources, it was explicitly to, and this is a quote, increase tensions between blacks and whites in Africa. Just pure racist agitation.
Wow. Okay, so how did the worship part get attached?
That seems to have been completely manufactured. Fake pictures started appearing online, presented as shrines to this Ebola-chan character.
Fake shrine.
Yeah, with talk of death cults, blood sacrifices, demon worship, and these really vile racist messages like, I love you, Ebola-chan, or Hail Blood Goddess, Hail Ebola-chan.
Just awful.
And the tactic was clearly cynical, trying to tap into maybe existing local beliefs, things like voodoo or ideas about sorcery.
Right, twisting those beliefs to make it seem like white people were using some kind of dark magic to spread Ebola.
Precisely. A very calculated, targeted disinformation campaign.
It's that weaponization of cultural symbols, isn't it? Taking anime visuals, twisting them with this horror imagery.
To create this sense of fear and otherness, yeah, making that false link between white people and the virus feel more sort of emotionally real, even if it makes no logical sense.
And this wasn't just contained online, was it? It had real impact.
Oh, definitely. Sources really stress this. It made the mistrust between local communities in West Africa and the international health workers much, much worse.
Which must have just crippled the efforts to help people.
Absolutely. Severely hindered public health work. And, Poll is kind of infamous for this sort of thing. Anonymous, decentralized, lets these toxic ideas spread like wildfire with almost no accountability.
Which actually brings us neatly to the second main source for this whole Ebola worship idea.
Right, which is that pre-existing mistrust and the ways disease was already understood locally in the places hit hardest by Ebola.
This seems really key. Because in places like West Africa, the DRC, places that have suffered terribly from Ebola, there are often existing cultural frameworks for understanding sickness. Deeply rooted beliefs.
Yeah.
And you combine that with, the historical baggage of colonialism, exploitation, maybe limited scientific understanding of Ebola itself in some areas. It just creates fertile ground for conspiracy theories.
So illness isn't always just seen as like a biological thing. It can be linked to sorcery, maybe, or spirits.
In some contests, yes. Curses, malevolent forces. So when a disease like Ebola appears terrifying, fast-moving, deadly, and maybe not fully understood, it's not surprising that some interpretations might involve deliberate harm or supernatural elements.
Okay, so the worship idea, maybe not literal worship like in a church, but
if you already believe the disease might be caused by something malevolent, the idea that someone might be aligned with that force or worshiping it in some sense, it doesn't feel like such a massive leap within that worldview. Okay, so you've got these two streams. The deliberate online hate campaign with Ebola-chan, and this genuine local fear and mistrust, interpreting the disease through existing cultural lenses. If you tried to stitch them together, what would the actual Ebola worship conspiracy theory claim?
right, if you synthesize it all, the narrative would look something like this. First, Ebola isn't natural, it's man-made. A bioweapon, maybe, or even some kind of supernatural entity.
Okay.
And then
there's a secret group, a cult, promoting its spread. And this cult is often linked to, well, Western powers, global elites, or sometimes just white people, like in the Ebola-chan stuff.
they're doing rituals to worship the virus.
Supposedly, yes. Engaging in rituals to empower Ebola or worship it.
And the aid workers, the doctors and nurses, where do they fit in?
They get cast as villains, too. Either they're deliberately spreading it as part of the cult, or maybe they're just pawns being manipulated without even knowing it.
And the supposed reasons why anyone would do this. Oh, the usual dark conspiracy motives. Depopulation, stealing Africa's resources, testing bioweapons, or just, gaining power from chaos and death. Really grim stuff.
So, given that it's this mix of manufactured online stuff and its interpretations, what kind of evidence do people actually point to? It must be pretty flimsy.
It is. It's almost entirely manufactured or twisted.
Like that weird altar someone found in Massachusetts. What was that about?
Yeah, the East Longmeadow thing. Someone set up this, display with the Ebola-chan picture, a mask, candle, weird writings, rice with fake blood.
Seriously?
Yeah, almost certainly just some bizarre stunt linked back to the 4chan meme, a very twisted prank, maybe.
But some people saw it as real proof.
You guessed it. Grabbed by some online as, look, see? There's an Ebola worshipping cult, even in America.
Wow. Okay. What else?
Then there's the misinterpretation of genuine traditional practices.
How so?
Well, any local rituals around honoring ancestors or specific funeral rites, things deeply meaningful in those cultures, could be deliberately twisted by outsiders or even fearful locals into looking like Ebola worship.
That's not just wrong, it sounds pretty racist too.
It often is, yeah, demonizing practices that aren't understood.
And you mentioned aid workers' actions being viewed suspiciously.
Right. Think about it from a place of deep mistrust. Quarantine zones. Suddenly being told you can't bury your dead according to tradition. People in strange suits, head to toe.
Yeah, the PPE gear.
Exactly. All necessary public health measures, but if you're already suspicious, it's easy to see how those could be spun into, see? They're doing weird rituals, they're spreading it.
It feeds the narrative. And that underlying idea that Ebola itself isn't natural keeps coming up, doesn't it?
Yes, the whole bioweapon angle is huge in some versions. That it was made in a lab, U.S. military, CIA, white people, specifically for population control in Africa or to grab resources.
And the worship part just gets layered on top of that. Like the cult is unleashing its weapon.
Sort of, yeah. It adds another layer of sinister intent.
And the disease itself, the symptoms are just horrifying. That must contribute.
Absolutely. For communities seeing Ebola for the first time, the sheer speed, the severity of the symptoms, the high death rate, it's profoundly shocking and frightening. It makes explanations involving supernatural forces or deliberate evil seem more plausible to some.
To the point where even treatments get questioned.
In the most extreme fringes, yes. Claims that the medicines or later the vaccines are part of the worship, or another way the cult harms people. It can even link to denial that Ebola is real at all. It's a total inversion of reality.
You know, when you look at the bigger picture, this kind of scapegoating during epidemics, it's not new, is it?
Not at all. Ebola worship fits right into a long, ugly history. Think about Jews being blamed for the Black Death in medieval Europe, or all the groups falsely accused of spreading HIV/AIDS more recently.
It seems like fear just makes people look for someone to blame.
It really does. And these theories often prey on that lack of trust in authority, governments, scientists, big pharma. They offer simple, albeit wrong answers when things feel chaotic and scary.
The bioweapon fear seems like a recurring theme too.
Definitely. It taps into modern anxieties about technology and unseen threats.
And social media just pours gasoline on the fire, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Especially during the 2014 outbreak.
Oh, massively. The speed and reach of platforms allowed things like the Ebola meme to spread incredibly fast, far faster than credible information could counter it sometimes.
So let's talk about the harm, because this isn't just weird online talk. It has real consequences.
Devastating consequences. The most direct is obviously on public health. If people believe the doctors are trying to give them Ebola or are part of a death cult,
They're not going to seek help. They won't follow safety advice.
exactly. They'll refuse treatment, reject safe burial practices, refuse vaccines, and worse. Our sources talk about actual physical attacks on health clinics, on healthcare workers. During the outbreaks in West Africa and the DRC, people died because of this violence, fueled by this kind of mistrust.
That's horrific.
It is. And beyond that immediate violence, think about the Ebola meme again. Its whole point was racist.
Right, to increase racial tension.
So it actively works to poison social relations, sow division.
And what about the stigma? For people who got sick or survived?
Huge stigmatization for victims, for survivors, even for whole communities associated with an outbreak. Makes recovery, rebuilding lives so much harder.
And while everyone's arguing about imaginary cults,
It distracts from the real stuff, like how do we actually prevent outbreaks? How do we treat people effectively? What are the poverty issues, the infrastructure problems that make these things worse?
yeah, it diverts all the energy.
And the biggest long-term damage, maybe, is just the erosion of trust. Trust in science, trust in medicine. That makes people more vulnerable to all kinds of health threats, not just Ebola.
So wrapping this up then, Ebola Worship, it's not really a coherent cult. It's more like a toxic sludge formed from online hate, specifically that Ebola meme.
That then seeped into real-world fears and mistrust that already existed, especially during those terrifying outbreaks.
Yeah, and the intent behind the online part, the meme part, was clearly racist, clearly manipulative.
Undeniably. It's a really stark example of how fear and lies can be weaponized online and then spill out with truly awful real-world results.
And for this deep dive, that's what we wanted to unpack. Not just the weird claim itself, but where it came from, how it worked, and the actual harm it caused.
Which leaves a pretty sobering question for you, the listener, doesn't it?
Right.
What does something like Ebola Worship tell us about how conspiracy theories work now? In our world, where information and disinformation travels so fast.
It's a chilling thought, really.
Yeah.
That maybe the scariest conspiracies aren't the ones with secret handshakes, but the ones that are just deliberate campaigns. Campaigns designed to divide us, to manipulate our fears, and they leave real destruction behind. Something to think about.